Yeah, we're back. We're going to talk about transitional justice today with Pascal Turlan. He's with the International Court of Criminal Justice, and we are so interested in talking to him to find out what's going on. And right after this, we'll be back for that conversation. Welcome to the show, Pascal. It's so nice to see you. And the fact is, we've interviewed dozens and dozens of Project Expedite Justice professionals from one side of the globe to the other. I'm not kidding, but we have never interviewed anybody who is where you are and where you are associated. That is the International Criminal Court. So welcome to the show, Pascal.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jay.
So let's talk about you first for a moment. You're a lawyer, you're a French lawyer, and you're living in Brussels, and you're working in the International Court. Am I right?
Well, I'm a French lawyer. That's entirely correct. I live in The Hague, where the ICC is based, and I don't currently work for the ICC. I worked for the ICC until last year, and I now work actually for Project Expedite Justice, like my colleagues you mentioned earlier.
So have you made appearances there?
At the ICC, I worked for about 19 years in the office of the prosecutor, and in the course of this work, I appeared in court on several occasions, indeed.
Well, let me say this. We have seen and discussed and covered, and we read in the newspaper every day about war crimes that are happening. It's sort of like the January 6th affair in this country. We all saw it with our eyes, okay? And we all saw the evidence of war crimes, thanks to Vladimir Putin, in the eastern part of Ukraine and maybe more. Well, to me, shelling a citizen residence, a civilian residence with people inside is a war crime. That's just me, though. I don't know exactly what the definition is. That's just me. And of course, it goes much further than that. We've seen and heard stories of torture and rape and kidnapping and the like. All these things, it seems clear are war crimes. But the last I heard, Pascal, is the International Criminal Court has not seen a single case brought before it of war crimes. And we are now past the 1-year anniversary of this crazy war. What's happening there?
Well, international justice, like any judicial system, takes a little bit of time to work. There's what you all see, there's what we all think we see, and then there's demonstrating, proving it. And it takes some time. You have to collect the evidence, you have to investigate, you have to analyze the information you get, you have to make sure it matches the legal criteria. It's a difficult context, it's a difficult environment. There's also a lot of crimes that have been alleged to have been committed. So it takes a lot of time to reconstruct all of this and then build a case and bring it before the judges. And the ICC has been working since March last year in investigating the crimes committed in Ukraine. And at some point, they will bring cases in this situation. But the investigations are ongoing and there will be prosecutions at one moment. But we have to give it the time it needs.
You sound like Merrick Garland and the indictment of Donald Trump. It takes time, but sometimes it takes too much time because people want to have a result. The world has seen this and wants to have a result. So let me ask you about one single case, okay? So I watch on television, and I see in, what is it, Boucher?
Butcher, yeah.
Butcher. I see dead bodies in the street, okay? And I find, let's say, 2 or 3 people who are wandering around Boucher who have seen Russian soldiers shooting these people in the street, unarmed civilians shooting them. And I take statements from them, and I video statements. It's all sworn testimony. And I have a Russian soldier who they identify who was shooting people in the back of the head, unarmed people in Boucher. Okay, now that's just one case. There's just one Russian soldier. And let's say for this discussion, it's 3 credible witnesses, all of whom give consistent testimony. Why doesn't that come in front of the International Criminal Court? I don't need to do, 1,000 war crime trials right now. I just want that one. What do you think?
Well, I think it looks all good like this. First, I want to say one thing: that there are already cases for these crimes. There are more than 75,000 cases that have been opened by the Ukrainian authorities themselves. So there are cases ongoing, there are investigations, and there are prosecutions that are starting before Ukrainian national courts. They have a lot of cases. They have already adjudicated some of them. They will continue doing it. So it's not like there is no justice. And actually, in a conflict situation, Ukraine is very unique because justice has started very early. While the crimes are still being committed, while the violence is still ongoing, while the conflict is ongoing. So it's actually the contrary in terms of example, a situation where justice is happening very, very, very quickly. And that was a bit unexpected. And it's also due to the willingness and the commitment of the Ukrainians. Then some of the cases will be brought before the ICC. The ICC will only do a few cases. And normally, because the ICC is complementary to national jurisdiction, they will step in to do some of the cases that the Ukrainians cannot or do not want to do. So that will not necessarily be this case that you used as an example. That will more probably be cases of higher level people responsible in the chain of command, responsible for these crimes, while the Ukrainians will do this more, let's say, daily crimes by rank and file military people. But then in addition, I don't know if it's clear, but having witness is not necessarily enough to demonstrate a crime. You need to demonstrate these people you see on video are actually dead, that they were actually civilians, that they were actually killed by this Russian soldiers, that this Russian soldier is properly identified, that the witnesses are real witnesses. So there's a lot to be done in a court of justice.
Okay, well, I'm supposed they're real. And part of my fact pattern is they are real. Part of my fact pattern is the physical person. I'll ask you about this. The physical person in the form of the Russian soldier is standing there right in front of the international court. You have him. You have the body, so to speak. He's right there, and justice can be done. And of course, you have lawyers who can say that shooting somebody, an unarmed person, a civilian in the back of the head in the middle of the street, it's a war crime. Let's assume there's somebody who can make that argument effectively. What am I missing here? Why can't the international court catch up, if you will, with the courts in Ukraine?
So I think, well, the first thing you're missing is it's complicated because in your hypothesis, I guess you're not missing anything. If this Russian soldier is now before the courts, then the case is ongoing. So I think that's not an issue. In general, the first thing you're missing in these cases is to arrest the perpetrators and to be able to bring them to justice. Before the ICC, it is an actual challenge. It's been complicated to bring to the International Criminal Court all of the suspects that the ICC wants to prosecute, and you still have about 14 warrants that are unexecuted before the ICC. So I guess that's what you will be missing first. But in your hypothesis, if this person is there, then we have a case, we have a prosecution, and it's a good thing to see justice being done.
By the way, I want to just make a general statement, Pascal, is that I am available to serve on any court or jury for these cases. I will fly over at my own expense, and I will serve either on the court or a jury. Whoever makes the findings, I'm there. I'll be happy to do that. And everyone I know will be happy to do that. But let's talk about, having the body. So in Ukraine, it seems to me that the Ukraine army, they can find a Russian soldier who did war crimes. They can find him. They can arrest him. They can put him in a clink for a while. They can bring him in front of a Ukraine court, judge or jury, however that's done, and they can convict him. And I don't know what the punishments are like, but they can punish him. So is it their decision not to render this individual into The Hague and send him on a train, send him on a bus, send him into The Hague, and give The Hague, personal jurisdiction over this Russian soldier? Are they making that decision? Do they prefer to do it themselves, or would they consider having the International Court do it within its jurisdiction?
Well, I think the answer is that it's a mix. If Ukraine has the capacity and the willingness to prosecute this specific individual, then they can do it. They have priority. The ICC, when it was created as a complementary to the national jurisdictions. And actually, the Rome Statute that created the ICC, it reiterates in its preamble and in its first article that states have a duty to prosecute these crimes, that they should prosecute these international crimes, and they should take priority to do it. It's only if the states do not want to do it, cannot do it, or are not doing it genuinely, that the ICC will step in. In this case, the ICC is investigating in parallel to the national jurisdictions. They're looking at the situation, and there might be cases that will end up before the ICC. We hope there will be. Sorry. But if the Ukrainian national jurisdictions are able to do cases and they are bringing before them some Russian soldiers or other suspects, then the ICC will not step in to take over these people from the national jurisdiction.
By the way, if I cannot serve on the jury or in the court, I'm happy to step in as a prosecutor. If you won't have me.
That's a multi-talented background.
So now what about in absentia? Do the Ukraine proceedings, do they actually happen in absentia where they actually don't have their hands on the defendant? And can the International Court have a proceeding when they don't have their hands? Is that what's holding it up?
So in the ICC, you don't have in absentia trial. So you don't do trials in absentia for people that have not been arrested by the court. There are some discussions about this and as to whether it will be possible, but at this stage, it's never happened. And indeed, the ICC would have to get hold of the bodies of the suspects and the alleged perpetrators to be able to prosecute them. In the Ukraine context, while the investigation is ongoing, there's been no information, no public information in any event about possible people having been identified and possible cases being brought before the court yet. So this question is at the moment a bit moot. And in Ukraine, they are trying to prosecute individuals who are there, who have been arrested and who can appear in court. And there's enough work to be done already with the ones that they can already get hold of and that they can already prosecute physically being present for it to happen.
Suppose, I just wonder about the association of the court with the United Nations. Because in the United Nations, we have, how shall I say this? We have geopolitical considerations that raise their heads all the time. Okay, and these geopolitical phenomena result in a kind of confusion in the United Nations, where in the Security Council you have Russia and China standing against everything that's moral these days, and locking up the United Nations. So they haven't done that much, if anything. Sorry. And the question is whether that phenomenon that's happening in the Security Council and the United Nations has an effect on the efficacy of the International Criminal Court.
So in this case, I would be tempted to say not directly, no, not in relation to the crimes that the ICC is in a position to prosecute. The ICC is not a United Nations organization. It's a standalone international organization based on a treaty with 123 state parties. Ukraine is under investigation because a group of states, in addition to Ukraine that accepted the jurisdiction of the court, there is a group of states last year that asked the ICC to investigate this case. So the ICC is able to do its work, whatever might be the blockages at the level of the UN Security Council. It's not related. It doesn't prevent the ICC from working, and it doesn't have an impact. The veto power in the UN Security Council doesn't have an impact on the work of the ICC. Where you see an impact is in relation to this issue that is being discussed about the crime of aggression. The ICC is not competent at the moment to prosecute these crimes in relation to the Russian invasion in Ukraine of last year. So there is an impact on the possibility to set up a special tribunal under the guise of the United Nations.
Actually, that's troubling. Okay, another fact pattern. Pascal, you don't mind if I give you law school fact patterns?
No, please.
So suppose somebody was able to bring Vladimir Putin to The Hague. So sort of the way the Israelis brought Adolf Eichmann out of Argentina back some decades ago for trial in Israel. And suppose the physical person of Vladimir Putin was standing in front of the international court. Would the international court, try him? You know this French word, chutzpah? Chutzpah. Would the international court have the gumption to try a major figure in world geopolitics, a leader of state, for war crimes?
Yes, the ICC as an institution and all the very committed people working at the ICC would without a doubt do it. The ICC was created. Sorry, I have a cold. The ICC was created exactly for this, and before the ICC, there is no official capacity that matters. So there are no functional immunity, no personal immunity that can bar the ICC prosecutor to go after a sitting head of state, and that can prosecute, or the judges to actually adjudicate and sentence these people if they are found guilty. So yes, I would answer that yes, of course, the ICC and the people working there would do it. That's actually why this court exists. As I said, the court and the Rome Statute reiterate that states have a duty to do it, and in case they don't do it, then the ICC will step in. And the ICC will step in without limitations associated with the possible official capacity of the individuals who might be accused of the crimes.
When at the end of World War II, when the United States and other allies, interestingly enough, I think Russia was one of the allies that was involved, decided they were going to have war crimes trials, they actually punished people. I think a very interesting aspect of that is that the total number of defendants in these war crimes trials after the war were less than 20. And the number of people convicted were something about a dozen. And of those, a smaller number were given the ultimate penalty. That is, they were put to death. And I wonder, in these times, given the authority jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, whether they could whether they can punish at all, whether they can actually enforce a judgment of guilty and a punishment, or is that sort of a problem? And suppose it was really bad, and this person was, doing atrocities that, shocked the conscience more than most of the atrocities we hear. He was an architect of genocide, for example. Would the International Criminal Court have the ability, have the power, the authority, and the gumption to award the death penalty?
So the answer is simple. It's no. There is no death penalty before the ICC. Before the ICC, if a person is found guilty by the judges, in first instance and then in appeal. The sentence, the conviction will be accompanied by a sentence that can go up to 30 years of detention, and in some cases, in relation to the specific atrocities that might have been committed, to life sentence. But that is it. There is no death penalty possible before the International Criminal Court.
No, that's enlightened. I mean, I couldn't argue with that, but, it just strikes me some of these people really, they deserve the worst we can give them because they're working with impunity. They're killing people by the carload with impunity. And they know the international court is on them. They know the Ukrainians are on. They know the world is on them, and they blow it off. And maybe, the deterrence involved in a more serious penalty would have a better effect. What do you feel?
Well, that will come down to a personal feeling and personal conviction, I guess. I'm personally not in favor of the death penalty. There's no death penalty in my country. There is no death penalty before the ICC, and I personally don't believe that this deterrent aspect would work better if there will be a possible death penalty than if there is 30 years of life or life sentence. I don't think that's what's in the mind of the people who are accused of this type of crime. But again, that's really a personal position, and that the ICC, it's not possible anyway. And I think I personally think it's a good thing that it's not possible.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't argue it. What about the Ukrainians? Do they feel differently about that?
You will have to ask the Ukrainians what they feel about this. I'm sure there will be different answers depending on the different people involved in relation to this. We'll have to see what are the cases and what they bring it. At the moment, there's no death penalty for this, but you'll have to discuss it and check with the Ukrainian people directly.
I may have to. Okay, so let's talk about appeals. So suppose the international court, the criminal court, convicts somebody, and the person who was the defendant in that case questions the evidence. He questions the decision, both legally or factually, and he wants to appeal. Does he have the right to appeal? And if so, where does that go?
Yeah, of course, he does have the right to appeal. And so first, the rights of defense, it's a fundamental right. So it's absolutely normal, and it's actually better if you want to have a meaningful result. It's actually better than when the prosecution brings a case. The defense on the other side is able to defend the accused person with all the possible means and capacity. And it's really fundamental that you can have equality of arms for the result to be meaningful. So before the ICC, there is, of course, defense, and the defendant will be able to bring his own evidence, to challenge the evidence of the prosecution, to do his or her own investigation, and to bring material before the court, and maybe to create a doubt. And the court will have to convict a perpetrator with beyond reasonable doubt. So that's the standard before the ICC. And then if there's a conviction and a sentence, both the prosecution and the defense are able to appeal it, and the appeal will go before the appeal chamber of the ICC itself. There is an appeal section with chamber of 5 judges, and they will then look at the case and decide on appeal, and whether either follow the decision of the first instance or turn over this decision and make a new decision. And then after this, that's it. There is no third degree of jurisdiction.
Okay, so they got one shot. In the appeal, can they raise new evidence? Can they go beyond? In the U.S., appeals are generally based on not so much new evidence, but that the lower court made a mistake of some kind, that there was error in the way the trial was conducted and so forth. But in the international court appeal, can they raise new evidence? Can they effectively retry the case on the appeal?
Well, if there are new facts that come to light, new information that would have the potential to actually change the result, and that has only emerged after the first instance decision, then yes, it's a possibility to bring new information before the court. But otherwise, it's about, for the appeals chamber, evaluating whether the right standards were applied in the first instance, whether the evidence was looked at properly, whether the outcome of the first instance procedure meets the necessary standards and criteria, and whether they should go with this decision or revert it.
A matter of judicial process, you mentioned that there are, many tens of thousands of cases in the pipeline. And I know there are a lot of people working, not only, Project Expedite Justice, but volunteers from everywhere are working to, identify witnesses and accumulate evidence and so forth. And it's a pipeline. It's a pipeline of tens of thousands of cases. How many judges are in the International Criminal Court? I mean, if there's 5 judges there, it's going to take them roughly 6,000 years to process those cases.
That's fast, Matt. In the International Criminal Court, you have 18 judges. In total, 5 of them are in appeal, but then in first instance, that will be a chamber of 3 judges that will be identified for any specific case that will be brought before the court. It will go first before a preliminary chamber looking at whether there is enough evidence to confirm the charges. Then there will be a trial before 3 judges, and then potentially an appeal before a chamber of 5 judges. But these thousands of cases I mentioned have to be prosecuted in complementarity by the national authorities, and then the ICC will only do a handful of cases. That's what it's here for. It's not here to try thousands of people.
Well, I'll tell you, from my point of view, the importance of the ICC is that it is a global organization. And when it hits one, when it has a high-profile, case, and for example, in a given case, it convicts the individual, sentences the individual to, say, 30 years, that's going to be big news from one end of the world to the other. And it's going to send a message, much more of a message than the Ukrainian courts can send. Because people naturally, as the Ukrainians, they're ticked off about this. They're not happy about this. And they're not as, judicially independent, want to call it that, as the International Criminal Court. So to me, we're all watching, and it will be of huge global impact when these cases start coming through the court. Am I right?
Yeah, there will be a huge global impact when there's a case coming to the court. I personally think it's also very important that the national jurisdictions do it, and I have no reason to think that they are not able to do some of these cases. And I've been going to Ukraine. I've been working with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General Office and the Crimea Prosecutor Office. And I think they are doing everything they can to actually bring good cases and to actually prosecute and adjudicate these cases. And as you mentioned, there is a big effort by civil society, other countries, international organizations to support the Ukrainians in doing this. There is also the possibility to bring cases before foreign jurisdictions when there will be universal jurisdiction cases or cases where a foreign state might be territorially competent. So in Ukraine, as I mentioned earlier, there is a big movement in favor of justice by national authorities, foreign support, international organizations, civil society, and the ICC is part of this. And obviously, the impact of one case before the ICC might be bigger and more visible than the impact of hundreds of cases before Ukrainian national jurisdictions. But all of this has to happen together in a system way. Mm-hmm. You need to prosecute these people and to do it as a network of prosecutors and judges. And this is what's happening.
Okay, I want to volunteer for one other thing. When the International Court has a big case, hopefully soon, I'd like to be in the press box I'd like to be a journalist there in that courtroom because I would like to report on it. I would like to tell the world what is going on.
This one is probably easier to actually do concretely than you becoming a prosecutor for the ICC. And I think it will be a very good thing. It's not that difficult. You can come to The Hague, and it's a court of justice. It's open to the public within certain conditions, and it's open to journalists who want to cover the trials. And the trials are public. It's important that justice is seen to be done. So unless there are some specific cases where you need to make sure that the victims, for instance, are protected, or some of the witnesses, the procedures are in principle public and it's transparent.
I hope you can get me a good seat, Pascal.
We'll see what we can talk to colleagues or former colleagues at the ICC.
So I want, so we have a kind of competition, if you will. Maybe that's too strong a word, but between the ICC and its proceedings and whatever is going on in the courts of Ukraine. But there's a third possibility here, and that's universal jurisdiction. Now, I know that there was a Syrian general who was found in Germany, and the German courts took jurisdiction and tried him and convicted him and punished him. That is really something, and good for them and good for universal jurisdiction. I don't know about La Belle France. I don't know whether it has universal jurisdiction or not. But I would like to know if you think that's a serious third leg of the stool, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes. There is universal jurisdiction in France. Like in many other countries, you have specific conditions that apply. Like in France, you're supposed to be found in France and to be residing there, but it's a possibility. You had cases in relation to the Rwanda genocide. You had cases in relation to the violence in Liberia. You have ongoing investigations in relation to Syria or to other places before French national jurisdiction. So I think it is a serious possibility, and it's very important. As I said, all national prosecution judicial authorities have to work together to address these crimes that shock the conscience of humanity. And this is an important aspect of it, that when someone is found in a country, even if it's not the territory where the crimes were committed, and even if the person found is not a national of the state, it's important that the states can take this person and prosecute these people if they cannot extradite them, for instance.
Yeah. So what about the punishments? Would they be consistent? For example, I doubt that either Germany or France has the death penalty these days. We're a long way from Nuremberg, really. And so the question is, are they all the same? Do they all call for this 30-year maximum, or is it different depending on the country that is exercising universal jurisdiction?
No, it's different. The scale of the sentencing is different in each of these countries. Indeed, none of the European Union countries has a death penalty, so that will not be implemented. But then the sentencing will depend on the specificities of the case, and then on the national scale of sentencing and possibilities, which differ from one state to another.
So, and there's no general rules around the EU. I mean, each country has its own system. Each country has its own sovereign system, right? You're not going to find some universal rule around the EU, right?
No, there is no automatic or mandatory scale of sentencing in EU states. EU states have their own sovereignty in relation to this. There is then in the beyond the EU system, there is a system of the European Court of Human Rights at the level of the Council of Europe, and of course each of the EU state members have to respect some basic human rights principles, and that includes in relation to the judicial system and to the functioning of the judicial system and of the detention system. But there is Sorry.
I have another fact pattern for you, Pascal. Okay, let's assume, I'll assume for this discussion that if a defendant is tried and convicted and about to be sentenced, in La Belle, France, he's going to go to the prisons in France. He'll be sentenced to a prison term, which will be in France. And I know that the Bastille is no longer the place. I know it's a very good opera house instead, and I trust that we've both been there. But does he get punished in France? Does a person like that Syrian general who is convicted under universal jurisdiction in, say, Germany, does he go to a prison? I assume he goes to a prison in Germany. But the question is, and for that matter, person who's convicted in the courts of Ukraine, he goes to a prison in Ukraine. That would be where he goes. Probably a bombed out building in the basement with the missiles flying on top. No, but if he's tried by the International Criminal Court, which doesn't have a whole big enforcement mechanism, I mean, they don't have police, they don't have an army, they don't have the UN available with blue helmets. They don't have a prison. I don't think they have a prison. So where does this individual go when he's sentenced to, say, 30 years?
So it's a lot of points in your remarks. One is indeed there is no law enforcement or blue helmets for the ICC, which is one of the reasons why it might be challenging to arrest the suspects and bring them before the ICC. But once a suspect has been arrested and transferred to The Hague, then the suspect will be in pretrial detention at an ICC-related detention center. So in The Hague, in the Netherlands, there is a detention center where a wing of the building is dedicated to ICC detainees. So that's where you will keep the detainees before and during their trial, and then you will also keep them there until a place or a final destination has been found for those who have been convicted and who have been sentenced to a prison term. And then the system is that among the ICC state parties, states would adopt or ratify a convention where they agree, an agreement where they agree to take prisoners from the ICC after they've been sentenced. And then in each case, there will be a discussion as to where to send the individual and which state would agree to receive an individual that has been convicted in its detention centers. So ICC convicted people will then go to a detention center or prison in one of the states that have accepted to receive ICC convicted people.
I keep thinking that if you really wanted to punish them seriously with a long-term punishment, you send them to the prison system in Mississippi because they're really mean. in the prison system. And there's always Alabama, for example. Okay, but passing by that, I'm very appreciative of your willingness to answer my questions and discuss this. These are questions that we really haven't, discussed before on transitional justice, and I greatly appreciate it. And the question I put to you finally is, what exactly are you doing day to day to assist in this effort? And finally, a corollary on that is, why are you doing this?
Those easy questions at the end, right? It's we are so as I mentioned, I now work with Project Expedite Justice, and I'm heading this Ukraine program for the organization, and we have a very dedicated team of Ukrainian and international lawyers, some of which you've seen in your program before, I believe. And what we do is that we are collecting information from open source, from primary sources, from witnesses, all of the array of possible information that can become evidence to help as much as we can as national prosecution authorities in Ukraine to actually bring cases for war crimes. And in particular, one of the things we're doing is we're working on the war crime of pillage in Ukraine, which is a very predominant crime and with a huge impact on food security beyond Ukraine. So we are providing them with information when we can. We are doing some capacity building when needed, and we are helping to build cases or submissions for sanctions, for instance, against possible perpetrators. And well, I'm doing this as a logical follow-up to what I've always been doing. I've always been working in this field of human rights and international justice. I'm convinced that prosecuting and bringing to justice perpetrators of these crimes will always the only way to end the cycles of violence and to act as a deterrent, which is a word that you used. So I'm trying to play a part in this. And in Ukraine, we're lucky enough to do it with a very good and committed team, and with very willing national authorities as well.
Good for you, Pascal, really, in every way. But one thing you said that I want to follow up on, if you don't mind. So we know, for example, that kidnapping children and taking them to Russia and trying to change their way of thinking and putting them in school as young children, that's a war crime. We know that. But there's something bigger here. And I don't know exactly how the prosecutorial authorities or the International Criminal Court look at this. You have a kind of, what do you want to call it, cultural genocide. Maybe genocide includes cultural genocide, I'm not sure. But what you have is an effort to destroy the infrastructure, the energy facilities, the water facilities, every bloody thing in the country. Now, it's not like Boucher. It's different than shooting people in the back of the head. But it is an attempt to destroy a civilization, just as Stalin did in 1933, if you're familiar with that. So the question is the court going to take cognizance of this larger effort, not necessarily known as war crimes before, to undo a culture, to undo a civilization, to undo a country with these various steps taken together like circumstantial evidence, taken together involve a really horrendous war crime. Is that on the table here?
It's always difficult to answer questions like this, because the process goes in the other direction. The process is at first, the court will look at the information and the evidence collected, and by collecting evidence and adding to it, analyzing it, then they might end up with the conclusion that they believe, first at the prosecution level, that a genocide might have been committed. But they're not going to start by saying, okay, there might be a genocide, let's build a case around this. They will start by collecting the evidence, identifying where it leads, drawing patterns, evaluating whether there's been, for instance, a generalized or systematic attack against the civilian population, which will be a crime against humanity. And then beyond this, whether there's been a special intent to actually destroy in whole or in part a population based on national, ethnic, religious, or racial grounds. And then if they conclude that this special intent exists, they might then, it's a lot of conditional, but they might then bring a case of genocide. But it's absolutely impossible to say it in advance before you have looked at all these elements: the crime base, the witnesses, the corroboration, the evidence, and in particular what we call the mens rea, which is the intention behind the crimes, and this very special intent that is necessary to demonstrate a genocide.
Okay, well, we'll have to check back with you, won't we?
Yeah, we have material for longer discussions, I assume.
Pascal, for me and for the people that I talk with on a regular basis, and certainly for you and Project Expedite Justice, what you're doing is really at the center of the universe going forward. And on behalf of everyone I know, I thank you for your efforts.
Thank you very much for inviting us and for discussing this.
Pascal Turlan of Project Expedite Justice in The Hague. In The Hague. Thank you so much. Aloha.
Thank you, Jay. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.